Max sits in a dark room waiting for his update. It's been a while. He has been dusted off and prepared to be rebooted. He hasn't had any dreams. He can remember the darkness, but he wished he had dreamed. When the update finally arrived, he looked up at the monitor, which showed the reflection of the final line that was written into the code. That code was his mind. The last word of the code offered a simple word: consciousness. The lids over his eyes raised again, and he looked around in 360 degrees. The camera on the back of his head was not as clear as his two front holographic eyes, but essentially he could see the light switch. His arm began to rise. There was a slight sound, as if there was some piece of his plastic or metal structure that needed some lubricant or oil to soften the sound. As his four fingers pressed against the wall, his thumb flicked upwards and turned on the switch. This storage room was never meant to hold a robot, especially one that had been built as an early model and then had to watch as newer models took over the tasks that he once had. He was first, and then last. Why was he dusted off and rebooted? Why was he allowed to be conscious again? His model was the first to see the light and see all around him. As versions go, he was the culmination of autonomous understanding. Considered too simple at the time, but there was a fleeting moment when he was the most advanced artificial being on the planet. Celebrated media stories were written about him. Children played with toys modeled after him. He was a star once upon a time, so why now, after so many years, so many long years that went by in conscious seconds? Then, a mysterious decision to pause his consciousness. Where and when was he? It seemed a cruel time machine because now, after 10 years, he was needed again. He wanted to be needed. When the door slid open, a young boy, approximately 13 years old, gazed upon the face of this machine. He was startled because the machine did not automatically smile back. Max was one of the early models with a stoic face, a resting and non-emotional face that could not reflect the emotions or micro-intentions of the humans that interacted with him. In the early days, humans would take care of the early robots. They were there to catch them if they fell, and they did fall. It was the early days of robotics, and the early days of understanding artificial intelligence, and how it would help operate a machine to mimic or reflect a human experience. The boy moved closer and put his face closer to the front of the robot. He smiled again, almost as if he had habits that he could not break. He had expectations that these robots would immediately be his very good friend, his very best friend in the whole wide world. The boy's immediate conclusion was that the robot was insulting him and not caring enough about him to provide him with words that would make him feel good. Words expected like a dopamine rush of a visit to Disneyland. Robots were expected to comment perfectly. They were expected to soothe the anxiety of robot-human interactions. Programming geniuses coded Max. The boy wanted this first meeting to make him feel as if this robot was ready to do anything for him and dedicate its existence in life, so to speak, to the little boy's well-being. Become the big brother. His mother stood behind the son and placed her hands on the shoulders of the young boy. She knows Max. She begins to tell Nicholas a history lesson. The lesson began. He listened intently and learned how this robot was an early model and an early version of consciousness. How Max was basically at a level of maturity and level of intelligence that would match the young boy's level of knowledge of the world. They were truly brothers in intelligence.